Morning, this is Brian. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024, and I'm here at Mission Trails Regional Park at the Mission Dam Trailhead, and it's time for a very long-awaited spotlight on plants. Today's focus is going to be on these awesome specimens here of hairy Matilija Poppy. And this is Romneya trichocalyx. Romneya trichocalyx is a large, mainly herbaceous perennial plant in the poppy family, the Papaveraceae. And it is a locally common colony-forming plant that can take up a lot of real estate by its very wide-spreading root systems. So the Matilija poppies, there are, I believe, only two species of Matilija poppies. This one here, Romneya trichocalyx, and there's another one called Coulter's Matilija poppy, which is Romneya coulteri. And while this video doesn't really focus on the Coulter's Matilija poppy, I will be mentioning that plant a few times, as these two species, trichocalyx and coulteri, are quite familiar and very similar plants. So what we have here again is a colony-forming shrubby perennial. I don't know, but it might form some very light woodiness towards the base of the stems, but generally it is largely an herbaceous plant. And the hairy Matilija poppy has some of the largest flowers of any California native plant. And we're going to be talking about those momentarily. And I'm going to give you at least a tip or two that'll help you tell this species apart from the often more famous Coulter's Matilija poppy. There's one telltale sign that'll separate these two. But first, so what we have are usually these very erect plants, very upright stems, and the plant is seasonally deciduous. In other words, Matilija poppies, depending on elevation and rainfall, will often shed their leaves for portions of the year. Lower elevations where it's drier, these plants will shed their leaves during the mid to late summer months and will be leafless until the middle of the rainy season. And in slightly higher elevation areas, they may be more winter deciduous, where they are leafless through most of the winter. So let's go take a look at the leaves. The leaves are kind of a glaucous, grayish, bluish green color. Very deeply lobed, palmately lobed. And the petioles, or the leaf stalks, have little hairs on them. Hairy Matilija poppy, trichocalyx, refers to the hairiness of the plant, and the calyx lobes, which I'll be going into sooner. And the lower leaves tend to be larger and more deeply lobed than the leaves higher up on the stem, which tend to be a little bit smaller. And it's got this, again, glaucous bluish gray green color, and that's typically an adaptation by the plant to reflect excessive sunlight so this plant doesn't dry out too early, especially because it lives in a climate where it receives pretty sparse amounts of rainfall during the course of the year. And you can see here, I was mentioning this plant is very colony forming. You can see here, that right there is a shoot coming up from the root system. It's another shoot coming up from the root system. Those are not seedlings. These are root shoots, also called suckers in horticultural parlance. So I talked a little bit about the leaves. The leaves lower down tend to be larger. than the ones on the top. So actually, the ones that are up on top are actually even more deeply lobed, actually, to be honest with you. But the ones lower down tend to be wider and juicier, which is pretty typical for a lot of plants that have larger lower leaves. And then the stems, again, they're largely herbaceous. There might be some slight woodiness in older stems. There might be some slight woody tissue. I've never seen the cross-section of one to really analyze it. But generally, these are herbaceous perennials. So, again, the stems take on the same coloration as the leaves, only maybe a slightly yellower tinge, and sometimes we'll have a few light hairs on it. So, and I'm assuming this is probably one genetic colony right here. This will probably be one major root system. And I'll go into the implications of that if you're considering gardening with this plant, because it does make a very striking accent in your garden. So let me go get a couple pictures of this colony, and we'll start talking about some of the even more interesting aspects of this beauty. All right, so we're going to talk about some more of the more interesting aspects of this plant that are probably of larger interest to the gardener. Well, I'd mentioned that Matilija poppies have some of the largest flowers of any California native plant. There you go. Humongous flowers. Wrinkly petals, beautiful stamens. Kind of looks like a fried egg, and a lot of times people call this fried eggplant because it looks like a fried egg. The flower looks like a fried egg. Massive, wrinkly, beautiful petals, humongous size. So of course, people who look at this plant say, hey, this looks like a cool plant to grow in the garden. A, it would be a cool plant to grow in the garden. B, it's a cool California native plant to grow in the garden. Baby California ground squirrel. So yeah, largest flowers of any California native plant. So yes, knock it out before. A great plant that would look great in a garden. So I mentioned the two main species of Matilija Poppy, Romneya trichocalyx, the one at hand, and Coulter's Matilija Poppy, which is Romneya coulteri. So how are we going to tell a difference between the two? Because the two are very similar and often confused species. There are ways you could tell, and the way I use to tell the difference, and you kind of need to do this during flowering, during the early to middle part of flowering, because you want to see the plant's flower buds to be able to tell the difference between the two. So we want to look at these flower buds to tell us whether we're looking at Coulter's Matilija Poppy or the hairy Matilija Poppy that we are discussing right now. Now, hairy Matilija Poppy has generally more rounded flower buds, more rounded sepals with little bristly hairs. And it's not going to be as evident on camera, but there are these little slightly raised bristly hairs that kind of feel like a slightly sandpapery texture when you touch the flower bud. And again, mostly rounded. And just a very slight pointed tip, but generally more rounded in cross section, so more globular. And again, the bristly sepals are going to tell you that you are looking at hairy Matilija Poppy. So, little stiff, bristly hairs are your telltale sign that this is hairy Matilija Poppy as opposed to Coulter's Matilija Poppy. So, what does that mean for Coulter's Matilija Poppy? Coulter's Matilija Poppy flower buds are relatively smooth. A lot of times slightly longer, slightly narrower in profile, and have a beak-like tip. That's on the Coulter's Matilija Poppy, the one we're not discussing. So you'll see this one here has a slight point at the tip, Coulter's Matilija Poppy kind of has more of a little beak-like projection at the end of it. So that's the main message I want to convey about separating these two species of Matilija Poppy. Romneya trichocalyx, bristly sepals on their flower buds, and Coulter's Matilija Poppy, smooth. And that should get its own spotlight video when I come across it. So in the wild, you're much more likely to come across the hairy Matilija Poppy, the one we're talking about here. So let me get a couple pictures really quickly, and then I'll start talking about more aspects of this plant and its distribution. So yes, hairy Matilija Poppy, especially here in San Diego County, is much more widely distributed than Coulter's Matilija Poppy, which is supposed to be pretty scarce. I would say pretty much all the Matilija Poppies I've seen here in the wild here in San Diego County have been hairy Matilija Poppy. Some good places here in San Diego County to see it would be on Black Mountain Road near Mercy Road, near the entrance of Penasquitos Canyon. There's a big population on the side of Black Mountain Road over there. I've seen them along the junction of 52 and 67 in Santee, and Rose Canyon on the west side of Genesee, and also along Genesee Avenue across from the high school. There's also a nice small stand of hairy Matilija Poppy. So hairy Matilija Poppy tends to be the more common one, especially here in San Diego County. Coulter's Matilija Poppy is supposed to be pretty rare, so you're much more likely to come across this. And one other thing, I believe the Coulter's Matilija Poppy flower is maybe even larger. Coulter's Matilija might be the largest flower, especially of the two. So, as I mentioned, the big beautiful flowers are a big staple of. Ooh, that little bird. This little tiny bird. I'm like inches away from it. Look at that. But yeah. So what are the implications for this plant if you're going to garden with it? Well, I mentioned that this plant forms colonies. So if you want to grow hairy Matilija Poppy in your yard, be aware you're going to need a lot of space for this plant because it has an extremely aggressive root system. As I was showing you, all those real root shoots coming out of the ground, this is probably one genetic clone right here. So if you're going to grow this plant, be prepared that it will, if it establishes, and these might be fairly difficult to establish, but once they get established, they're taken over. So you'll probably have to monitor the size of your colony, especially if you're trying to grow other native plants with it. Because I'm almost willing to bet that this is one clonal colony right here. A little bird right there is just so photogenic. But again, another benefit of having Matilija poppies is good wildlife habitat, because the plant forms very dense thickets where wildlife could use for shelter. Pretty much just showed you a full physical example by that bird using the poppy as a place to abscond and have its own little niche. Other animals like squirrels and lizards and bees love these. As you can see, this honeybee right here is just having a field day over here by this Matilija Poppy flower. So, but just be aware, unless you are willing to aggressively control the spread of this plant, be prepared. It will take over if it gets established. It might be difficult to get established, but once it does, this plant will be likely to take over your garden unless you keep it in check. So, and that goes the same for Coulter's Matilija Poppy, which again will be more specifically addressed in a future spotlight video. But this is an absolutely stunning California native plant. I wouldn't say it's extremely common, but it could be locally common to abundant where colonies get established. And the kind of habitat that these plants grows in, quite unique. Well, they seem to like a lot of disturbed areas. I see them a lot of times on the sides of trails, the edges of parks. So a lot of times they'll get established in open areas, kind of near woods or chaparral, sometimes in open areas of sunnier areas of forested areas, and a lot of times alongside roads and trails. So disturbed areas seem to be a pretty common place for this plant to get established. And right here, we're right here at the trailhead for the Mission Dam area of here, Mission Trails Regional Park, and we got a nice little population here. So yes, awesome plant. Seasonally dormant, so later on this summer, these plants will probably shed most if not all their leaves and look like a bundle of sticks by early fall. These plants, again, are pretty scattered here in Southern California. I'll give you a more comprehensive range of this plant on the screen as to where this plant is found from county to county. But it can be locally common, but usually pretty scattered here in Southern California. And definitely a plant worth checking out if you're out on a hike. Again, pretty easy to identify down to the genus level, Romneya. Matilija poppies are pretty easily separated from other species. The closest things that might be confused with Matilija poppies are the prickly poppies in the genus Argemone. They're typically much smaller, less widespreading, and usually shorter-lived perennials or even sometimes annuals, and their foliage is very prickly, and actually can be painful if you grab a bunch of leaves. And the flowers are typically noticeably smaller on the prickly poppies than they are on the Matilija poppies. So Romneya trichocalyx, hairy Matilija poppy here at Mission Trails. Definitely a plant worth checking out. Easily accessible and easily seen here at the Mission Dam Trailhead here at Mission Trails. So, okay, one thing I do need to mention, the fruits are usually seed capsules. Fruits are seed capsules that'll split open, and the seeds are usually pretty small and brownish color. They'll split open and the seeds will drop into the soil, and eventually the pieces of the capsule will break off and they'll leave these little stubs behind. This is what's left behind after the seed capsule opens. So yeah, definitely an interesting plant. Once those seed capsules fall off, you get that little stubby at the end, it's a little stubby piece at the end. Well, this is going to basically do it for this spotlight video. Hope you enjoyed getting to know one of our two largest California native flowers found here, scattered spots here in Mission Trails and in Southern California. Thanks for watching my spotlight video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this inspired you to get out and go on CalFlora, look where populations of these plants are located, go out and check them out for yourself. You won't regret it. And if you can get some seeds online or buy the plants in a nursery, if you got the room, give this plant a chance yourself. Pretty interesting plant. Well, that's going to do it. And thanks for watching. And I'll see you on the next Spotlight episode.